So thank you for the invitation, Kathy, Steve, Sai, the committee, which is bigger than the folks out here. Today I'm going, in the spirit of Steve Polasky's, I realize that every time I say Steve, there's more than one Steve, there's more than one Kathy, so pretty clear here. But the measure, and if we can manage when we can measure, although that's not necessary or sufficient, I guess. This is a paper in the spirit of the session on shocks when you are in the womb and the effects long term. So it's in a way another take on what David was showing us in a second. I'll tell you that. Going on the second day, though, there's a bit of a, as you're thinking as a group, not just about your own work, there was a lot that you saw, and you're distracted by what you should speak about because, are you going to do a review, a narrow thing? The one thing that I guess I would take away is, thanks to David, I know because I'm a vegetarian, I'm already ahead of the rest of you, right? So I have reduced my carbon footprint, that's my contribution, right? So this helps. Two other disclaimers. One is, I'm in a session where the previous two papers have been on payments for ecosystem services. Some of you know we've done a lot of work on that. My mind is already on that work, but really I'm changing gears and looking at air pollution and health, and so I'm not going to be talking about payments for ecosystem services. And lastly, I'm not going to do a review, though I have to say something about air quality and health, or environmental change, ecosystem change, and health. I will argue that that's one of the ignored issues, not in a US context. There's lots of EPA's laws came out of that, but in a developing country context that was ignored and is now being picked up. Okay, hopefully I can make this move forward. So in the spirit of, I like the way Chris he's out of the room, all these ideas and he tried to distill them down to a few points. Because beyond this slide, I'm not going to keep track of what I have to say. So this is my only important slide. Point number one is health-related ecosystem services are relatively understudied and understated. At some level, it's a low-hanging fruit because the health community is very passionate about data and collecting it and organizing. And of course, they are fanatical about some things and not other things. But if we can tap into that, we can sort of take on some of these ecosystem change implications, okay? I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. As was mentioned many times yesterday, things are on the up. There is more data, there's better data, there's more creative combinations of data, and that makes me think that the glass is half full. So there was a lot of pessimism yesterday. I'm looking at Scott here and Paul, but things are changing. I'm just thinking back to mid-90s when we were grappling with these issues. There's hardly anything to work with, and it's a lot better. Of course, as you saw in not just the previous two presentations, but yesterday, we also have a higher standard of what is evidence, and that's needed because there was a lot of casual causation, casual analysis, and that's there. That said, something that Kathy Kling was talking about, we sometimes become our own enemies because we chase perfection and get one parameter right, and then we multiply it with another parameter which we make up or we grab from somewhere else. So we get the impacts right, but the values are wrong. We got the values right, but we have no impacts to measure. Paul and I have sort of talked about this. This is Paul Ferraro. I now notice there's two Pauls also. Okay. So getting, as much as we're seeing more and more careful work on impact evaluation, the shadow prices, this is something that Alex was kind of implying. These are different in different places. Now, what do we do with that? I guess that's implicit in Kelsey's talk as well. These references are sort of running through my head, and that's why I said this is the only slide that I can keep track of. Now, Kathy Segerson was telling us that all that may be fine and dandy, okay? Here's our normative goal. Given how much oil palm is hurting children's health, we should have less oil palm. But how are we going to get there? If we don't take the transactions costs and the implementation costs seriously, and this is some work that Steve Polasky and I are trying to sort of push on this community to understand sort of the full suite of costs and benefits instead of just the tacked on quick CBA that we're going to do at the end. I'm also going to do it, but as David was pointing out, there's a whole suite of stuff out there. And at the end of the day, this field right now, when we think about the three themes, what do we need? How do we mainstream this science? Okay, I'm going to paraphrase what Kathy Kling said and talk about reducing type 3 errors. Get it approximately right, that's going to move us so far along rather than fixating on something. Okay. A few years ago, Alex and I tried to, when we were looking at this field of environment and health, and there's all this dose-response kind of thinking, where do economists play a role? Well, behaviors, okay? There's either you're worrying whether that dose actually has that effect because there's selection of various kinds, or if you want to understand and we were trying to convince the conservation community to sort of look more at the health impacts, taking the economics and behaviors into account. They weren't listening to us that much, but the Lancet Commission comes along, it kind of elevates it to, this is now the public health community honestly admitting that maybe they should have been paying more attention to the environment as a source of health outcomes, okay, or well-being. So this happened last year or a couple of years ago, and that gave it some more prominence. The case that I'm looking at here is all that smoke that happens. There are climatic events which triggers it, but there's also human action that's associated with that. And really, I'm not looking at the case that others have studied, which is children right then, but the children who were about to be born, okay? And so there are costs and benefits associated with that. That's the visual you should have in mind, and I'll show you that the numbers are off the charts in some ways. Okay. So the question literally is long-term height. We pick on that because that can be multiplied by something that has value, because people have figured out that tall people make more money. I'm sorry for all the short folks in the room, but this is a fact, okay? There's some evidence that documents how much more money you're going to make if you're taller, okay? And we find that at mean levels of exposure associated with a spike, it's a half a standard deviation, okay, in height. We track these children 17 years out, and they're shorter, okay. Of course, what is half a standard deviation? Some calculations you can look at half a standard deviation and argue about that. It's about a third of what you would have from other work that is done on mortality, okay? It's almost as bad as that, because there's more kids out there, they're not dying, but there's loss, okay? That's the real conclusion. Air quality, as Gretchen just said, is a rising issue. You hear more and more about these aerocalypses if you travel through Beijing or Delhi. Someone was saying they're worried about the air quality in Phoenix. Marty was just saying that. But I'm talking about 1,000 parts per million when your plane gets into the lower, you can feel it. And then you think, what is going on? So most of your friends will tell you, well, we live with it. Really? So you wonder if they've been doing this year after year, and this is getting worse. What might be going on? Are they not computing all the costs and benefits? There's been previous work. Seema's own dissertation work had looked at probably using the same data set, whether there were children that just died. Okay. And the clock is ticking there. There's more than what I've done. Okay, so the piece that I'm doing differently is looking at these long-term outcomes in the spirit of, when we talk about sustainable development, this is totally unsustainable development at some level. Okay. So you already know what I'm going to find because I reported that. This was an unusual spike, okay? Some folks claim that as much as 40% of the global emissions increased in that 1997 fire. So this is a bad climate setting confounded by a lot of burning of the lands, okay? As I've said, others have looked at mortality associated with that and some adult functioning, okay? Both at Duke, others in this room. We focus on height. I've already told you why. We look at their heights when they were 3 years old, 10 years old, 17 years old. Okay? So the kids who were in the womb when this fire happened. This is what I mean by better data. So in the sense that now, for some countries, you have cohorts of kids that can be tracked. But you're also getting, so that was happening for a while, okay? But we are also getting satellite data that is crude, perfect, not being the enemy of good, but it's something, okay? To tell you something about air quality, because you want to link environment to health, okay? And you're going to wait around and only do it in Canada where there's good monitoring stations. You're going to lose a lot of where the action is or where the problems are, okay? Indonesia. Of course, other things matter, and so you spend couple of years trying to sort and line the districts and the match the coding, et cetera. So this is not saying it's a 15-second download job, but it can be done. The main point is that there's spatial variation and there's temporal variation. Okay, so some places got more of that spike, and some places didn't get it. But the same places also got different amounts, so if you cannot just be blaming it on the fixed effect that is associated with that location. Okay, what do I mean by that? Hopefully this picture will show you in a second. So Sumatra and Kalimantan, as most of you who worked in Indonesia or know something about it, saw that. Okay, these are big islands, lots of people. Java, Bali, the rest of Indonesia, not much. So that's, in a sense, this is not your RCT, but it's a treatment control, okay? But also, the same parts of Sumatra saw different amounts of air pollution at different points in time. So look at August, September, October, and Kalimantan. So these places are seen. So depending on when you were born or how old you were in the womb, you had a different exposure. So it's okay, so this is where really the identification, as we would like to worry about, is coming from. Equations, obviously, data. I'm running out of time. Of course, how do we know that I mean, you know, just because there's spatial correlation doesn't mean that this is necessarily the case. And this is, again, in the spirit of one of the bigger points, you have to do bunches of other checks. You know, you want to bring good evidence to inform policymakers, so you've got to do some additional checks. So what if these regions continually tend to have more air pollution, okay? So what you're seeing now needn't be the exposure in 1997, it could have been in the future, so obviously we try to control for that, okay? So we include the air quality in later years, and as you might expect, there's, you know, I wouldn't be standing up here talking about this if there was a massive effect. What if it's something about the region, okay? So you can do a variety of placebo checks. In this case, what we do is like, even before they were born, right? I mean, even before they were conceived in 1996, whatever the air quality was, we assign them that. Okay, if there was something about the place, then that assignment should have had an effect on the results that we see. And so the wrong dosage, we don't see that. How do we know it's this environmental health channel and not an income channel, okay? A spike like that, a lot of burning, there's all kinds of activities that are affected. You aren't able to work outside, okay? So then we look at the subpopulation of households who work outside and see if they suffered more than the others, right? What if they just were consuming less food? Okay, I'm just making the point that nowadays we have to go beyond just running regressions at some level, but also do a bunch of checks, okay? So yes, we also look at their incomes, and that didn't change that much, okay, in the post-fire years, right? So this is just a variety of robustness checks. This is the visual of the main result. I don't know which button actually creates the light, but here you are, these kids are shorter. That's the main result. Most of the results are driven by kids who were not yet born, right? So they were in the womb. It's not being driven by the kids who are just 6 months old or 3 months old, okay? So, and these are the various other checks, okay? And by and large, the result stays stable. Those are tables that are proving whatever is showing you on the graph, watching the clock there, okay? How do we know this is a big number? Half a standard deviation, okay? Well, okay. The two signs are consistent. Gretchen, there's a clock up there, which is also telling me what the time is. Well, as I said, height is being associated with income earning capacity. That's a systematic review that sort of shows, on average, one standard deviation is 8% less income. Just to get a ballpark, right? Most of the work in environmental health is looking at deaths, and you're saying, well, people survive, but do they survive and live happily ever after? And we're saying, no, they're shorter. Not looking at only the short folks in the room, okay? And they're going to be hurt. And so how much are they going to be hurt if you do multiplications like many cost-benefit analysis end up doing? It's about 560 million. If you talked about the deaths that are associated with this fire, you'd get 101 point, whatever that number is. It's 3 times as much, right? But 30% is not a trivial amount of loss that is suffered by those who survive. Okay, so this is a big number. The main conclusion from this case study, and then I'm going to step back and talk about the research agenda in this sphere, is that while there is a lot of attention on mortality and short-term morbidity, long-term impacts are possibly not trivial. And so when you're talking to people about these aerocalypses that are happening, that's some of the action that's missing in their thinking about, oh yeah, we are looking at hospital visits and those are going up, but there's just the next generation, you're talking about sustainability, that is being affected at some level, okay? Do I know exactly that this is what's going on and those are the right estimates? You know, there are judgments made on using height as an indicator, aerosol, AOD as a proxy for air quality. These are coarse, but this is where I don't want perfect to become the enemy of the good, because to mount a data collection exercise that spans 17,000 islands in Indonesia over a 20-year period, of the kind that you now see, say, in the US with air quality monitors, and you're still upset about the quality of that. I was laughing at David's water quality comment. He's not sure about the water quality in the US. Well, you know, I have no idea that we don't have good water quality data in Indonesia, and maybe that's what's the main result here. But if we are going to wait 25 years, in the urgency that some of us are calling for to sort of deal with this, we've got to work with something, okay? So that's this type 3 error issue. Of course, then stepping back to, say we've got this normative comment that palm plantations, which Jeff Vincent, who works with me on some of this, was like, what are you saying, oil palm is bad? Thousands of jobs were created, et cetera, et cetera. No, I didn't say that. I said, well, there are external costs associated with oil palm that are not being accounted for, and partly because we don't have a measurement, we don't know how big they are. I fully appreciate that the political economy of fire in Indonesia is very complicated. There are many actors, but we have to start laying out, and organizations like C4 is sort of trying to document this, okay? This is going, long-term solutions will take avoiding forest conservation, reducing reliance on fire, avoiding cultivation of peatlands. This is now one study, one group, one estimate. This is a whole series of studies. Or not even done in Indonesia, but grabbed from somewhere else, okay? So as the planetary health and ecosystem change and health community is pushing the agenda on, there is another aspect of ecosystem services that was ignored. These health consequences can be serious, whether they're in the diet, it's on morbidity, mortality, and therefore we should do more conservation or not. I think that's still an open question because we haven't sort of done the full mapping of all the losses and gains, okay? And that's going to require commitment from people across all disciplines, right? So Steve and Paul and others are sort of trying to write a message to that planetary health community, which is taken off. I don't know if anyone is tracking that. There's an alliance, there's thousands of members, they have annual meetings, and their message is, Houston, we have a problem. Okay, no, we've known that for a while, okay? There's a big problem, but what are we going to do about it? until, as the NatCap project is trying to do, mainstream science into the decision-making, okay? Until we do this mapping of the full suite of benefits and costs. And especially at what corporations, at these, those oil palm plantations are conglomerates, okay? But they also, will they face the CSR pressure if these kinds of studies come out that there's long-term health consequences of your action? Maybe. Okay? And of course, we have to be very mindful about the mix of methods that we have to use to sort of address this. I looked at one question, one set of issues, but as others have demonstrated, there's other things out there. Okay? And then there's uncertainty. That's it. This thing is beeping. I don't know if it's going to blow or something.